So when we think about enrollment, I always say this: enrollment is the tail light that tells you that something is not working. When you see in a traffic jam, you see the tail lights come on, you know that either you're in the wrong direction, you're going there, you got to slow down, you got to rethink what you're doing. That's what enrollment decline is. It is it is the tail light that says something isn't working, and people have to stop and understand what it is. Everyone thinks, oh, enrollment is going to resolve it. And people discount tuition and get people into enrollment. And the reality of it is, it isn't just enrollment. There's so many other things that come into play that dictate enrollment. Like vendors don't say, oh, I had X number of transactions. No, you want to look at the products and things that you're building that allow for that enrollment transaction to occur, right? So I have a poll, and I use this poll as a way to get us all, let me stop sharing, and then I'll start the poll. And I call it the enrollment taillight poll. So what is causing enrollment decline? And I'll have you guys answer that question really quick. And we're going to try to be done at the bottom of the hour. So this one may be a little bit more faster in our discussion, but hey, I want to say thanks for each of you guys, for having the passion to go overboard on each one of those previous topics, and we can continue it as we go. And as people are populating this answer, feel free to chime in and talk about, what some of this means to you in terms of enrollment. And Jim, I think you go through this on a day-to-day basis. Enrollment is probably on a dashboard all the time, right? So
yeah, Matt, I was going to say almost this question is this sans COVID pandemic, kind of disassociating what's currently happened just with trends previous to this that might be exacerbated by our current circumstances.
And I think it's even post-pandemic. What's going to decline enrollment even post-pandemic? We should think about that, right? Because I think part of any school being successful, they have to figure out, what does enrollment look like in a post-pandemic ecosystem?
Well, part of that, I think part of that, Matt, is organizations and schools realizing as Jim kind of stated, I like the word exacerbation, right? The idea that COVID had kind of put into a focus the areas that the schools were really struggling in, areas that schools that had a decline. Declines in enrollment weren't just because of COVID. Declines in COVID that because of COVID were exacerbated because of COVID. The rural enrollment's going down. Schools decline because either their technologies weren't up to speed, or legacy systems that just aren't where they needed to be, and schools just loving to put band-aids on top of band-aids on top of band-aids versus changing out to what the progression of what is needed out there. That's such a hard thing for organizations, and we all know how far behind schools sometimes are when it comes to some of those things. Some are much more than others, but at the end of the day, we want to be able to adapt to the changing student, and the traditional school model makes it really difficult to do that, and you see that in a lot of these environments.
That's great.
Hey, Matt.
Yep.
This is Mark.
Mark.
Great discussion. I mean, something I've been thinking a lot about, and as I've taken a bit time away from an executive role, doing a little research on my own. So the sense I have, and I won't call this scientific, but I have talked to a number of folks that focus on outreach at community colleges. It appears that we're really seeing the bifurcation within higher education that we've seen in society overall. And I don't know if any of you attended the Strata Education seminar last week. There was one key finding that I thought was a great point, because community colleges have seen a much steeper decline in enrollment, where even 6 months ago, the prediction was they were going to see an increase. And so what the hell happened versus traditional? The thing that I thought was interesting, if not illustrative, was the trust level of people who are attending community college, particularly first generation attendees, particular people from underserved communities, is much higher in the institution to provide them guidance and a path forward than it is for those students attending four-year colleges, particularly expensive elite ones. And you look at that and say, well, that's curious, because the currents are flowing in the opposite direction of what the predictions were. Now, if you get in and you start talking to the engagement people, you say, well, what is happening with these first generation folks and underserved? And as one person described to me, it's the same problem from the hood to the holler. And the problem is economic. And if you ask them what are the biggest impediments to attending, it is childcare, transportation, food security, part-time employment. That's it. Those are the issues. And so herein lies the opportunity and the huge problem, particularly for community colleges, and that they've got this need within the community to do a lot of things that are without which it's very hard to convince anybody, let alone a first generation person that doesn't have support at home, or people from these underserved communities that are balancing a whole bunch of different things. And COVID is maybe both their parents are out of jobs. So the idea that they're even going to think about pursuing education until those things are resolved is a stretch. And so here, like it or not, a lot of the other and so I see the discussions out there about enrollment and tuition discounting, whatever. We're twiddling the controls of the current process and not moving the needle. And by the way, the same thing is true in the companies that are trying to figure out how to do job reskilling on that side. A lot of money going into that. VC money, federal grants, et cetera, needle's barely moving. And so I don't mean this to sound negative, but the sense I'm coming to is a lot of the conversations we're having are just on the periphery of the core issue. They're not going to change things, or we're talking about things that until we change those other things, it's just talk.
Yeah.
And it's huge and it's intractable. And this is where I'm hoping, in the context of the Biden administration, that if you can get that funding, if you can fund those outreach positions that can go to those different communities and say, okay, kid, this is, or continuing adult or whomever, this is how we're going to support you as part of your education journey, then I think you start to kind of rebuild enrollment. And again, Ivies, top research universities, in this context of a triage, they're fine, whatever. There are drops in enrollment or issues or whatever, it's just noise. They're not going anywhere. This is what we're faced with. And historically, the community colleges created the middle class in the United States. And here we are on the cusp of something potentially fantastic, but the stakes are pretty high. So
I touched on one thing there, Mark, that I think is really important, is that getting the community involved with the community college to address these issues. I've had some clients that the college itself tries to address these issues, but there are resources out there. If they could all pull together sort of wraparound services, they cause people to drop out or not being able to continue to deal with the child care issues and the food insecurity issues and the housing insecurity issues, the stunning amount of students who are homeless and literally living and studying in their cars. I mean, these are, we need to bring the whole community in to support the student to be able to get them through it. It's not just a college question.
Yeah. So this is, and we're going to have to close it because we're coming to the bottom of the hour. I know some people have to jump, but I think this is why this FutureX tribe discussion and anything in collective discussions is important, because we're all from diverse places, right? We got a chancellor of a community college. We have Ivies here. We have Mark, who's designed the softwares we all work on today. We have people that work on Workday. We have people in Ellucian. Like, what we need as a collective group need to understand is the discussions have to be beyond just technology. It has to be beyond what we do today. It has to be thinking about the other things in this ecosystem that are going to be really important. And Mark made a really good point. Like, you know, we talk about funding, we're thinking, oh, we're just going to help them, but maybe funding has to be used for the socially impacted. Maybe they're the ones that maybe our technologies that we all design need to figure out who they are and how do we interact with them a little bit differently in the way that we work, right? So those are the discussions that I think is really important. I know we're at the bottom of the hour. I'm willing to stay on a little bit longer for others. If people have to drop, totally respect it. We're going to have one next week. I think Nicole is volunteered a topic. We're going to do this next week. And then we have another one stacked for the following week. So these discussions are really important. And I appreciate the time that you guys gave us for the hour. Others, if you want to chime in, feel free, because you can see the topics here: cost of enrollment, time, and the fit for purpose is a really important element, and then just value is unknown keeps popping up, right? So I'll stop there and see if anyone has any thoughts.
Matt, maybe one final comment. I agree with what Mark is saying, and I had the pleasure to work for Eduardo Padron, the former president of Miami-Dade College. And what's interesting is something that has always struck me, and I think it points to the role of the community college, is that in Miami, Eduardo Padron was never seen as just the president of the college. He was considered a community leader. And, one of the small things that we did was, because people need to work, our 7 a.m. classes were one of the most popular. So, but I would say that, when you have a college president, and I'm sure it's the same with Chancellor Lambert, that are seen as community leaders, we need to nourish that and provide the support.
So it's interesting that you make that point about that 7 a.m. course. So, Dr. LeBlanc, who runs Southern New Hampshire, in his discussions with us in our podcast, he speaks about the student body that turns themselves on when their kids go to sleep at 7 p.m. and that the importance of his campus to be available to them till midnight, right? He recognized that there is a set of student body that he has to serve that needs to have access to support till midnight, right? Those are the kind of things that we as an institution and people that are working to support these institutions have to start thinking about. How do we make ourselves, and to be honest with you, we should become a 24/7 ecosystem.
Yeah.
It should be on
Matt,
demand. Yeah, go ahead.
We had one like that. That made me evoke kind of thoughts of a Clackamas Community College in the Portland area. Had one of their most popular courses was midnight welding. Nice. And you'd have people get off that late swing shift, and they'd be on a whole different sleep cycle, and they get off of that, and they wanted the skill build to come in there, and the midnight welding was like packed.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And I think this is the kind of stuff that I think, it's going to take a village to make this change, but it's also going to take a village to actually educate people that they have to think differently, right? A lot of you guys work for me. I appreciate you guys all coming and supporting me, even though you work for other firms now. But I think a lot of what I've always said is, how do we collectively do really good things in market, right? And that is something that I think we can do together as we move forward.